Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I'm with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you Chapters 7, 8, and 9 of A to Z Mysteries, The White Wolf. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 7. It took them only a few minutes to carry the telescope to the front section of the deck. Abby showed them where to position it. The rain drummed steadily on the tin roof over the porch. Josh put his eye to the lens. "I can hardly see anything through the rain," he said. "I'll have to wait till it stops," Abby said. Dink knew Abby was disappointed that she couldn't use her telescope. "Do you have Monopoly?" he asked. "We could play till the rain stops." Abby nodded. "Sure, it's on the shelf by the fireplace." Josh rubbed his hands together and grinned. "How about we make teams? Boys against girls?" Abby and Ruth Rose exchanged glances. "You're doomed," Ruth Rose said. The kids set up a table in the living room. Wallace and Walker joined the teams. Thunder boomed and lightning lit up the ocean as they played late into the evening. The rain finally stopped, but the game still wasn't over when Wallace yawned and declared it bedtime. Dink picked up a flashlight and he and Josh walked out onto the deck. They stood for a minute and stared toward the ocean. They could hear waves hitting the rocks, and the smell was sweet and salty. "I wonder where those poor baby wolves could possibly be," Josh said. "And the mother," Dink added. "Gee, maybe she came down here and crawled into your bed." Josh laughed. "Grandmother, what big teeth you have," he said like Little Red Riding Hood. The boys made their way around the deck and slipped into their tent. After they were undressed and beneath their blankets, Dink reached out and shut off the lamp. He was almost asleep when Josh grabbed his shoulder. "Dink!" Josh whispered. "Something's moving around outside the tent." Dink opened his eyes. "What? All I hear is you keeping me awake." "Shh! Listen!" Josh hissed. Dink yawned. "Josh, if you're—" Then Dink heard a slithery noise, like something scratching against canvas. Dink gulped. Josh was right. Something was outside their tent. A moment later, he heard a wolf howling. "Oh, gosh!" Josh cried. "The mother wolf came after us. She's on the deck." When the wolf howl stopped, Dink heard another strange noise. Rubber wheels squeaking on the wooden deck. He also heard two girls giggling. Dink smiled. "That wasn't a wolf," he told Josh. "It wasn't?" Josh whispered. "What was it?" "Something much worse than a wolf," Dink whispered in return, holding back a giggle. "What could be worse?" Josh asked. "A bear?" "Even worse," Dink said. "That's Ruth Rose and Abby out there trying to scare you with Abby's wolf recording." And they did. "Did not," Josh said. "Did too," Dink said, just before he fell asleep. The next morning was bright and sunny. The only signs of the storm were a few puddles. "What do you kids have planned?" Wallace asked at the breakfast table. "I'm going to sit at my telescope until I find those people who took the wolf pups," Abby said. "We'll help her," Dink said. "We can each take turns looking through the telescope." Wallace stood up and carried her plate to the counter. "Well, I'm going grocery shopping. Food disappears fast in this house." "I'm going to work on my plane," Walker said. He helped clear the table, then left through the back door. Abby, Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose took turns peering at the ocean through the telescope. They saw hundreds of boats of all sizes and colors. Ruth Rose pointed out a woman who was sailing a small boat. She had short blonde hair. Abby shook her head. "No, the one I saw had a ponytail," she said. "It was sticking out that little opening in the back of her baseball cap." It was Josh's turn at the telescope. "Hey, Abby, take a look," he said. "A woman with long blonde hair is going by in a blue motorboat." Abby quickly took Josh's place at the telescope. She put her eye to the lens. "That's her!" she cried. "She's even wearing the same baseball cap." Abby pointed to the boat in the harbor. "Let's watch where she goes." They watched as the boat moved away, growing smaller in the distance. "I've lost her," Dink said. "There are too many small boats out there." "Well, I can still see her," Abby said, her eye still at the telescope. A few seconds later, Abby backed away from the telescope. "The woman went to one of the small islands," she said. "She tied her boat up at a dock with a blue awning at the end." Each of the kids looked through the telescope. Each could see the dock and the blue canvas. "Now what do we do?" Ruth Rose asked. Abby looked at Ruth Rose. "Someone has to check out that island," she said. Chapter 8. "Who?" asked Josh. "Us! We could look for more clues," Ruth Rose said. "How do we get out there?" Josh asked. "By swimming?" "Morris usually comes by around 9:30, Abby said. "You can hitch a ride with him. He brings hikers and bird watchers out to the islands all the time." 15 minutes later, Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose were sitting on Wallace's dock waiting for the mailboat. Josh was carrying food in his backpack. Ruth Rose wore a smaller pack holding Abby's tape recorder. "Why are we bringing the tape recorder?" Dink asked. "Abby said we should ask Morris to go by those rocks where the seals live," Ruth Rose said. "If we get close enough, I'm going to try to record their voices." "There's Morris," Dink said, standing and waving. A white flat-bottomed boat chugged up to the dock. A man wearing a sea captain's hat waved at the kids. "Need a lift?" he asked as he pulled his boat up to the dock. "We're friends of Abby, sir," Ruth Rose said. "She said you might take us out to one of those small islands." "Sure thing, and everyone hereabouts calls me Morris," the man said. "But which island? There are about 30 of them." Dink pointed toward the island where they'd seen the woman tie her boat up to a dock. "It's one of those," he said. "The dock has a blue awning at the end." "Yep, I know that one," Morris said. "Some rich gentleman lives out there. His estate takes up half the island." Morris looked at the kids. "I don't think he welcomes visitors," he said. Josh held up his pack. "We're just going to have a picnic," he said. "Great place for a picnic," Morris said, "as long as you stay off private property. Come aboard." When the kids were zipped into life vests and seated on a bench, Morris pulled away from the dock. He directed his boat toward a cluster of 3 small islands. Each had a different colored awning stretched over the water at the end of a dock. "What are the awnings for?" Josh asked. "They protect the boats from the sun and rain," Morris explained. "You step into your boat, you don't want to sit on a hot seat or a wet one." Morris headed toward the smallest of the 3 islands. He pulled up to the dock, and the kids stepped out of the mailboat. They dropped their packs in the shade under the blue awning. Tied to the dock was a motorboat painted the same blue. The kids slipped out of their life vests and passed them to Morris. "Thanks for the ride," Ruth Rose said. Morris handed Dink a magazine and some other mail. "Would you mind leaving this inside the gate?" he asked, pointing toward the other end of the dock. "Sure," Dink said. "I'll swing by here for you in about half an hour," Morris said. "Can you be finished with your picnic by then?" "No problem," Josh said. Morris gunned his engine. "Okie dokie, see you later." The kids watched Morris pull away. Soon his boat was just a speck on the water. The dock was quiet and cool under the awning. The only sound was made by the water gently slapping against the small blue boat. "Now what?" asked Josh. The kids turned away from the water. The dock was as long as 2 school buses. At the other end was a small sandy beach. The whole island was covered with trees and bushes, but part of it was fenced off. Behind the fence, among tall trees and thick shrubbery, they could see a chimney and part of a roof. "That must be where the rich guy lives," Josh said. He glanced down at the boat. "I wonder if that woman lives there too." "We can't go inside the fence," Dink said. "No, but we can peek through the gate when you leave the mail," Ruth Rose said. "Let's go," Dink said, reaching down for his backpack. "We've only got a half hour." "What's that stuff?" Ruth Rose asked, pointing to a blue smudge on the gray dock. Ruth Rose knelt down for a closer look. She touched the smudge, then smelled the tip of her finger. "What is it?" asked Dink. Ruth Rose looked up at Dink and Josh. "It's blueberries," she said. Chapter 9. All 3 kids were on their knees studying the stain. "You're right," Josh said, "and it looks like it came off someone's shoe." He traced a finger around the smudge. "See, this round edge looks like part of a heel print." Josh looked at Dink and Ruth Rose. "Guys, someone stepped in those blueberries we saw yesterday," he said. "This could have been made by the same person." "Right, the people who carried the cage down to the boat," Ruth Rose said. Dink glanced up, and the awning kept last night's rain from washing it away. "Hey, what are you kids doing?" someone shouted. Startled, the kids looked up. A tall man and woman in shorts and t-shirts were hurrying down the dock toward them. The woman's blonde ponytail flopped over one shoulder. We were wondering if we could have a picnic here," Ruth Rose said. Josh held up his pack. Do you know you're on private property? The woman asked. How did you get here anyway? I don't see another boat. The mailman dropped us off, Ruth Rose said. He'll be back to get us in a half hour. Dink held out the mail. Morris asked me to put this inside your gate, he said. Thanks. The man took the mail and opened the magazine. Okay, the boss is away, so I guess you can have your picnic, the woman said. She pointed toward the sandy beach. Up there, please. The man and woman turned and strode back up the dock. The kids scrambled after them. When they reached the sand, the man walked through the gate, still reading his magazine. Please don't leave any litter behind, the woman said. Then she stepped inside the gate, slammed it shut, and walked through the shrubbery. They could be the wolf nappers, Ruth Rose said. That woman had a blonde ponytail. When we get back, we can call the game warden, Dink said. Guys, we only have a half hour, Josh declared. Let's eat. He sat in the sand and opened his pack. Dink and Ruth Rose knelt as Josh brought out 3 juice cartons, a bag of cookies, and some grapes. High over their heads, a few gulls soared. Look at all those seagulls, Ruth Rose said. Watch out, Josh. They might zoom down and grab your cookie. They better not, Josh said, glancing at the sky. Why don't you turn on Abby's tape recorder, Dink said. If they come closer, we can get some gull noises for her collection. Good idea. Ruth Rose took the tape recorder out and set it on her flattened pack. She pushed the record button. The kids began to eat. The only sounds were their munching and a few gull cries. Guys, what are we going to do? Ruth Rose asked. If those are the people Abby saw, the wolf pups could be here on this island. Dink turned and looked through the fence into the thick shrubbery. But we can't get in, he said. Ruth Rose shook her head. Why would anyone want baby wolves? She asked. I just don't get it. The rich guy who owns this place must be their boss, Josh said. He might have told them to steal the babies. But why? Ruth Rose asked. For pets, Josh said. I read about a movie star who had a leopard. But that's cruel, Ruth Rose said. Wild animals should be left in the wild, and those babies should be with their mother. We have to rescue them. How, Ruth Rose? Dink stood up and walked over to the gate. He tried to open it. Locked, he muttered. Suddenly, a bunch of gulls swooped down and landed on the sand. Shoo! Josh yelled, making the gulls take off again. Just then, they heard a toot. There's Morris, Josh said. The mailboat was still a ways off, chugging toward the island. The kids packed their stuff and hurried onto the dock. They stood waiting next to the blue motorboat. Josh glanced down. Suddenly, he lay flat on his belly and leaned over the boat. What are you doing? Dink asked. Looking for clues, Josh said. If the baby wolves were in this boat, there might be some hares. He peered beneath the seat. Aha! Josh reached under the seat, then yelled. He jumped to his feet, shaking his hands in disgust. What did you see? Ruth Rose asked. A mouse, Josh said. Really? Ruth Rose said. We should catch it and set it free on land. Too late, Josh said. It's all wet and slimy and dead. Thank you. Be sure to tune in next week for chapters 10, 11, and 12. Goodbye.